This is an Aerobed, spelled like so. It's a clever design. It's got a pump inside there and can be inflated when it's needed and then deflated electrically when it's needed. Except this one doesn't deflate. So in this video, I'm gonna get to work and try to deflate it. I'm gonna take out the motor or the pump that's in there that inflates and deflates it, and my guess is that there has to be a check valve somewhere with a diaphragm, possibly a rubber diaphragm, that somehow gets clogged or whatever, or disintegrates, gets crumbly or sticky or whatever, something dysfunctional inside there. And that can be serviced, maybe, hopefully, because if it doesn't deflate after it's being used, it's not entirely practical. So I'm gonna get to work on this. So when I take the switch gear apart here, of course there are 3 micro switches inside, unpowered as is, and this is the one that does not work at all, and this is the one that inflates instead of deflates, which is weird. So I'm gonna take them out of the recesses here, and maybe there is something weird there with the wiring. I don't know if these should be in this position at all. There seems to be some exposed wiring there that's, I don't know if it's still soldered on well enough. So I'm gonna take a look at the situation here. This seems to be solid at all 3 connections. So far so good. This one, the wires are looking good, and this one seems to be just working fine, but this is the only thing that works fine. Yeah, everything is still in place, so nothing is visibly charred, burnt out, whatever. Nothing is melted. So far so good. So I'm gonna keep digging down there. So once these 6 screws come out, the motor unit just slides out, and the bed still wouldn't deflate, but that's another story. Let's take a look at the motor first. What do we have here? This little motor, barely used, and is absolutely void of any visible deformity. Nothing is burned, charred, or otherwise deformed on it. The commutator segments are intact. These 2 carbon brushes are looking in amazing condition. Lots of carbon brush length left in this. Bearing might need a little oiling, but it runs fairly well. What I'm considering here is that this square blocky unit here may not be sitting square enough or well enough, even though it has 2 screws only on one side, because it has this lever that operates a check valve that's inside the bed, and this doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And also there is there in this light you can see that there is a spring rod there, and a square metal tab seems to be not quite in place at this angle, seems to be turned out of its housing on the bottom there. I can maybe show you that if I try to move it there, this end of this valve here, or the end of this lever arm here, which needs to move somehow freely in order to deflate and inflate this airbed. Without that moving, this is stuck in one position, and this valve can only take on air. So the This is how it deflates spectacularly easily, but of course this needs to be pressed by that lever on the motor. So the bed and this check valve here is flawless. It doesn't need to be removed from this housing. But the motion that I create with my hand needs to be generated electrically here by this lever arm. I hope that makes sense. So I'm gonna see what I can do with this mechanically to align everything and make sure that everything moves. So out of the frame, everything works electrically the same. Motor spins one way, motor spins the same way. And when I press adjust, you can hear the switch clicking. Something is mechanically stuck in it, so I just unplugged it. I'm gonna undo these two screws and align this unit in the housing here, so the end of this metal rectangle is housed properly in a square recess. Alright, I've removed these two screws. So this now turns more easily, but basically it needs to slide in order to deflate that push button valve. And of course, this unit here is a large solenoid valve that should do this electrically. It doesn't need to rotate anywhere. I still don't understand why the metal plate there isn't in this position, but if it is, then this push rod here comes into contact with the plastic housing for the motor above, so that doesn't fit. It needs to be kind of in this offset position, and this plunger just needs to work. Let's plug it in. Oh yeah, whatever I did obviously works. Deflate also activates the plunger. Inflate does not. In inflate and deflate, the motor runs the same way, and adjust is operating only the solenoid. Well, I guess it's fixed. So the solenoid has been mounted back with these two screws, and I want to point out that in order for this to slide, the metal tab at the end of it needs to be in its recess. If you recall, the end of this lever here was in this position, something like that, and it needs to be rotated back. Now to show you, I took out two more screws, one from here and the other one from here. So these two screws came out, and it's super duper easy to see here how this plunger moves in this direction. And if it's not mounted down enough, the plunger rod there or the spring is going to hit the motor housing there. So if you recall, when we started, the end of this there, the end plate there was not in the housing, so you have to jiggle the components in so this end of the plunger rod is down enough in its recess in this direction so it doesn't hit this part of the motor housing. Okay, then the screw holes line up perfectly, and then everything works. It's fully functional. I'm just gonna lubricate it with 2 drops of oil somehow. Well, that's the easy part there, and I'm gonna try to do something yeah, maybe not. So I put the motor back and it turns somewhat easier. Most importantly, everything is fully functional. So it deflates, adjusts, and inflates. And it's really easy to move the plunger. So I'll pop it back in the housing. So now everything's been put together. Let's see how this inflates. So far so good. Nice. It deflates when it's fully inflated, or deflates this way. Inflated. Oh yeah. Working as it should. In another half a minute, I am good to go for folding this thing up and storing away. So, mechanical fix, nothing wrong electrically.